In the dry village of Nandala, where the earth cracked from thirst and the sun never showed mercy, lived a girl named Naima. She had skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes wide with unspoken sorrow. The villagers rarely saw her smile, and those who did said it was like sunlight escaping from behind heavy clouds, brief but beautiful. Naima was the eldest daughter of Jumana, a sharp-tongued widow known for her bitterness and pride. Since the day her husband died of a snake bite, while searching for food, Jumana had changed. She never forgave Naima. "It was your hunger that sent him out," she often hissed. "You brought misfortune with your first cry." So Naima became the shadow in her own home. Her younger brother Dula was pampered with fresh fish and new clothes, while Naima wore torn wrappers and ate leftovers, if any remained. Her hands were always blistered from cleaning, cooking, or carrying water across the village. Yet she never complained. Not once. One late afternoon, as Naima returned from the river balancing a pot on her head, she heard murmurs from inside their clay-walled hut. "She's no use to me," Jumana's voice snapped. "She's past 15 and still unmarried. I should have married her off long ago." "Who would marry a girl with nothing?" another woman asked. A cold silence followed. Then Jumana's tone lowered. "There is someone, Bashiri." Naima's breath caught. She had heard that name before. Bashiri, the man in a wooden wheelchair who sold colored fabrics at the edge of the market. People said he was cursed, that his legs had stopped working after a snake bit him in his youth. Some said he was clever with his hands. Others said he was unlucky and strange. "Bashiri?" the woman whispered. "He can't even walk." "He has goats," Jumana said, her voice dry. "And millet. That's more than Naima has brought me." Naima's knees almost gave way. She turned and ran behind the house, the water pot crashing to the ground. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She was used to this life. Still, something in her chest began to crack, not from fear of Bashiri, but from the final realization that her mother had no love for her. That night, Jumana handed Naima an old calabash of porridge and said nothing. The next morning, she gave her a torn wrapper and told her to prepare. "You're leaving this house," she said flatly. "Your new husband is waiting." There was no ceremony, no drums, no laughter, just Naima walking barefoot down a dusty path with Jumana beside her, holding a bag of dried fish as part of the dowry exchange. When they reached the market, Bashiri was already waiting. He sat silently, his arms strong despite his legs, his face unreadable. He looked at Naima once, then lowered his gaze. "She can cook," Jumana said with a false smile. "She's quiet. She'll serve you well." Naima didn't speak. She bowed her head as her mother turned to leave without a hug, without a blessing, without even looking back. And so, just like that, Naima's fate was sealed. She followed Bashiri slowly, her bare feet dragging through the dust, the wind picking up the scent of sorrow behind her. The road to Bashiri's home was long and coated in dust. Naima walked behind him in silence, the sun burning down on her back. Bashiri moved slowly, pushing his wooden wheelchair over the uneven path with strong arms. He didn't speak a word, and neither did she. What could she say to a man she was forced to marry? When they arrived at his compound, Naima stopped and looked around. The hut was small, just one room with a roof patched by palm fronds. A broken gourd lay near the doorstep, and a thin rooster pecked at the dry ground. She had known poverty before, but this was worse. Bashiri opened the wooden door with one hand and rolled himself inside. He paused, then looked back at her. "You can come in," he said simply. Inside, the room was nearly empty. A straw mat lay in one corner, and a short table leaned unevenly near the wall. A few pots sat on the floor. That was it. No bed, no comfort, no sign of joy. You can sleep there, he pointed to the mat. Naima walked quietly to the corner and sat. Her heart was heavy, but her face showed no tears. She had learned long ago not to cry in front of others. That night, they ate a thin porridge made from old millet. Bashiri didn't touch his food until she had eaten. It surprised her, but she said nothing. When the oil lamp flickered out, they sat in the dark. Two strangers brought together by trade, not love. Days passed, then weeks. Naima fell into a rhythm, fetching water, cooking, cleaning, and following Bashiri to the market. He sold brightly colored fabrics, most of which he made with his own hands. Naima carried the rolls on her head, while Bashiri pushed himself beside her. People whispered as they passed. Look at her, married to a cripple. She must have been cursed. Even Bashiri has a wife, and I'm still alone. Someone laughed. Naima heard them, but she kept her eyes low. She had heard worse before, from her own mother. At the market, Bashiri laid out the fabrics, and Naima helped arrange them. The cloths were beautiful, smooth, rich in color, and well woven. She watched him work with quiet skill. Though his legs didn't move, his fingers moved like flowing water over the threads. Customers came, some curious, some skeptical, but Bashiri rarely spoke. When he did, his voice was calm and firm. Naima started to wonder, how did someone like him, mocked and rejected, manage to create such beauty? One morning, while folding fabric, she noticed a silk cloth unlike any she had seen in their home. It was thick, luxurious, fit for chiefs, not poor traders. She ran her fingers over it and frowned. Where did this come from? She asked. Bashiri looked at her. Does it matter? Naima hesitated. You're not like the others say. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to his work, but Naima saw it, the flicker of a hidden truth behind his eyes. That evening, as they sat near the small cooking fire, Naima dared to speak again. Why don't you ever shout at me or hit me? That's what I'm used to. Bashiri looked up from the cloth he was mending. Because you are not a servant, you are my wife. Naima looked away, heart pounding. No one had ever said such words to her, not with kindness. For the first time, she felt a tiny spark of warmth in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something she'd never known before, respect. The days inched forward, slow as a snail across sand. But something was shifting, subtle, like dry grass moving in a breeze. Naima still rose before dawn, her bare feet cold against the cracked mud floor as she swept the hut and fetched water. Bashiri never asked her to, yet she did it. And each morning, as he sat tying cloth bundles for the market, he would say softly, "Thank you." 2 words. That was all. But they felt like gold to Naima, precious and rare. At the market, she now stood beside him confidently. She greeted customers, unrolled fabrics, and described the colors with words she never knew she had. Bashiri watched quietly, allowing her to speak. One afternoon, as they packed their goods, a man strolled by with a mocking grin. "Ah, Bashiri," he called, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your wife works harder than you. She should get a bride price for marrying you." Some laughed, others smirked. Naima's fists clenched, her heart pounded in her ears. Then, before she could stop herself, she turned and faced the man. "She carries what he cannot, but he does what others won't," she said clearly. "That is not weakness. That is partnership." The laughter died. The man blinked, embarrassed. It was just a joke. Naima didn't respond. She turned back and continued folding the cloth, her face calm, but inside, something bloomed, a sense of strength she had never felt before. That evening, as the sky turned orange and birds returned To their nests, Bashiri stopped beside her as they walked home. "You surprised me," he said quietly. Naima smiled slightly, eyes on the road. "I surprised myself." He didn't reply, but his lips twitched with the beginning of a smile. That night, as Naima stirred the pot of millet and vegetables, Bashiri waited for her to serve herself before touching his plate. As always. But tonight, he added something different. "You speak with fire," he said, "but not everyone who burns is cruel." Naima looked at him. "You think I'm kind?" "I think," he said slowly, "that you are more than what others have told you." Naima looked away, a lump forming in her throat. She didn't know how to answer, so she didn't. But the fire crackled between them, warm and soft. Later, as she washed their few clay dishes, she heard Bashiri humming a tune, low and rough, like it hadn't been sung in years. It was a lullaby, one she vaguely remembered hearing as a child. For the first time, their hut didn't feel empty. It felt lived in, shared. The next morning, Bashiri handed her a folded cloth. "For you," he said. She opened it, a simple headscarf, woven with bright orange and gold. Not expensive, but new, and just for her. Naima stared at it, then at him. "Why?" He shrugged. "You've earned it." She tied it around her head, her hands trembling slightly. Then she looked in the cracked mirror by the door. For once, she didn't see the unwanted daughter. She didn't see the girl given away, like a burden. She saw someone growing stronger, someone becoming whole. The sun was fierce that morning, painting golden heat across the sky. Naima adjusted the basket on her head as she and Bashiri made their slow walk to the market. His wheelchair creaked over stones, but he said nothing, focused on the road ahead. Naima didn't offer help. She had learned he preferred to move by his own strength. When they arrived, she began laying out the fabrics as usual. But today, something caught her attention. She reached into one of the cloth bundles and pulled, out a fabric so fine, it shimmered in the sunlight. Deep blue, smooth as river water, with golden threads stitched into the pattern. Her eyes widened. "Bashiri, this cloth, it's not like the others." Bashiri looked at her, then away. "It's special." "Where did you get it?" She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Some things are better shown than explained. Before she could ask more, a customer approached. Naima greeted her warmly and unfolded the shimmering cloth. The woman raised an eyebrow. "This looks too rich for a man like you to be selling," she said with a smirk. Naima braced herself for Bashiri's usual silence, but to her surprise, he responded, his voice steady and calm. "Quality speaks for itself. Not all treasures wear gold." The woman blinked, then slowly nodded. 3 yards, she muttered, reaching into her pouch. Naima glanced at Bashiri. He didn't smile, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Pride. As the day went on, more people came. Some curious, some skeptical. But the cloths sold quickly, and the whispers that once mocked them began to quiet. Respect was creeping, in like a slow tide. Later, as they packed their unsold pieces, Naima leaned closer to him. "You spoke today. You never do." Bashiri didn't look at her. "Not everything needs words, but some days, silence doesn't protect you." Naima nodded slowly. She understood that too well. That night, back at the hut, Naima sat by the fire mending one of Bashiri's shirts. He watched quietly, his hands resting in his lap. After a long silence, he asked, "Did your mother ever treat you kindly?" The question startled her. The needle paused in her fingers. "No," she whispered. "Not once." Bashiri didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "Mine didn't either. Not after the accident." Naima looked up. "Accident?" He nodded. "I was 10. Fell from a mango tree. Broke my back. Couldn't walk again. My father left. My mother said I was cursed. She said no woman would ever marry me. Naima's heart tightened. She looked at the strong man before her, the one they all mocked, but who had never once raised his voice, never once hurt her. I guess we both come from cold places, she said softly. He met her eyes. But we don't have to live cold forever. That night, the stars above their hut twinkled brighter. The wind blew gently through the trees, like whispers from ancestors watching with quiet approval. And inside the little hut, something warm began to grow between two wounded souls learning to see each other not with pity, but with understanding. Naima laid down, her head resting gently on her arm. For the first time since she had left her mother's house, she didn't feel afraid of tomorrow. She felt ready. The next few weeks passed like wind over dry grass, quick and quiet, but something had changed in the air. Naima no longer walked. Behind Bashiri, she now walked beside him. The villagers had stopped laughing. Some even greeted them politely. Others watched in silence, unsure what to make of this quiet pair who had turned whispers into wonder. Naima had grown strong in her role, cooking, trading, even helping Bashiri dye fabrics. Her hands now knew the rhythm of weaving, and her voice had learned to sell without fear. One bright market day, just as the sun reached its highest point, a voice cut through the crowd like a snake's hiss. Well, well. Look who has become a woman. Naima froze. That voice. It was a ghost she hoped never to hear again. She turned slowly. Her mother, Jumana, stood just a few feet away, dressed in fine clothes Naima had never seen before. Gold earrings glinted in her ears, and her braided hair was freshly oiled. Beside her was Naima's younger brother, Dula, now taller and dressed like the favored son he always was. Is this how you live now? Jumana sneered, eyeing the simple cloth stall and the small earnings. Selling rags with a cripple? Naima's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Her heart pounded. She had imagined this day many times, but nothing prepared her for the sting of seeing her mother again, especially like this. Bashiri remained silent in his wheelchair, his expression unreadable. I see you still have that sharp tongue, Jumana said, her eyes narrowing. But listen well. I came to give you a chance. Come home. Dula has found a wealthy friend who is willing to marry you. He doesn't mind your history. Naima's chest rose slowly. You mean the history you gave me, the life you chose for me. Her mother's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You think this is a better life? Sleeping in a mud hut with a man who can't even walk? Then, to everyone's shock, Bashiri spoke. She is not a prisoner, he said. She is free to leave whenever she wants. His voice was calm but steady, like stone. Jumana's smile twisted. Then leave. Come, Naima. Let us forget this mistake. Naima turned to Bashiri. He didn't look at her, but his hand rested gently on the side of his chair. Tense. Waiting. She looked back at her mother and brother, at the faces that had never shown her love, only hunger and pride. Then she did something no one expected. She smiled. No, she said clearly. I'm not going with you. The market fell into silence. Jumana's eyes darkened. You are ungrateful, after all I've done for you. You did what suited you, Naima said, her voice low. Not once did you ask what I wanted. You'll suffer, her mother warned. You'll regret this. Naima straightened. I already suffered, for years, but not anymore. Without waiting for a reply, she turned to help Bashiri pack the fabrics. The conversation was over. Jumana stood there for a moment, her face stiff, then turned on her heel and walked away, Dula trailing behind her. As the crowd dispersed, Bashiri looked up at Naima. You could have gone, he said. Naima met his gaze, her voice calm and sure. Yes, but this time I chose my life. And for the first time in her journey, Naima didn't feel like a burden or a victim or a forgotten daughter. She felt like a woman who had finally taken back her story, the full. Next morning, Naima awoke to birds chirping just outside the hut. The scent of roasted maize drifted in from the small fire Bashiri had started before sunrise. He wasn't a man of many words, but he had a way of showing care through quiet actions, and Naima was learning to read them. As they sat eating, Naima broke the silence. "Why didn't you ask me to stop when my mother came?" Bashiri didn't look up. "Because if I asked, it would mean I was afraid of your answer." Naima nodded slowly. "But I stayed." "I know," he said. Later, at the market, they sold more fabric than ever. A wealthy woman even asked if Bashiri could prepare cloths for her daughter's wedding. Naima noticed how some of the villagers now greeted them with respect, not ridicule. But she also noticed something else. Behind every roll of fine silk was a hidden truth. The fabrics weren't ordinary. They were too perfect. Too rare. That evening, as they returned home under the purple-streaked sky, Naima couldn't hold it in anymore. "Bashiri," she said gently, "where do the fine cloths really come from?" He paused for a long time. Then, with a deep breath, he said, "Come inside. I'll show you." Inside the hut, he moved a clay pot aside and lifted the straw mat. Beneath it, hidden in the dirt floor, was a small wooden box. He pulled it out and opened it. Inside were scrolls, parchments stamped, with seals. Some had names of far-off cities Naima had only heard in travelers' stories: Kantara, Mbere, Ndulu Port. And there were letters, some written in Bashiri's careful hand. "These," he said, "are trade contracts. Years ago, before my accident, I worked with my uncle who owned a large fabric business. I studied under him. I learned the patterns, the dyes, the markets." Naima's eyes widened. "You were wealthy?" "We were," Bashiri said, "until the fall. I climbed a mango tree to impress my cousins. Fell. Broke my back. My uncle abandoned me. My mother blamed me. I lost everything." She listened, in silence as Bashiri's voice trembled slightly. "When no one would hire me, I started trading on my own. Small at first. Then I began sending letters to old contacts. Slowly, they trusted me again. They send the cloths from the cities. I sell them here?" Naima stared at the scrolls. "Why keep it secret?" "Because people only see my chair," he said. "Not my work. Not my mind." Naima looked at him with new eyes. Not as a disabled man, not as the one she was forced to marry, but as someone who had quietly built a new life from ashes. A man who had been thrown away and still rose. "You are more than what they see," she whispered. He met her gaze, his eyes soft. "So are you." That night, Naima sat by the fire, sewing a new headscarf from the blue and gold fabric he had saved for her. Bashiri sat nearby, sharpening his tools with steady hands. There was no need for music. The silence between them was full, rich with unspoken truth. They were two people stitched together not by fate, but by understanding, choice, and quiet courage, and, though neither said it aloud, a new thread had begun to weave between them, not just respect, not just friendship, but love. The morning breeze was gentle, carrying the scent of earth and charcoal. Naima swept the hut's doorway, her movements calm, her spirit lighter than it had ever been. For the first time in her life, she wasn't merely existing, she was living. With purpose. Bashiri was by the fire, folding cloth. His fingers moved with practiced ease. Since the day he shared his past, something had shifted between them. The silence they once shared now felt warm, like a blanket on a cold night. Just then, hurried footsteps broke the peace. A young boy, no older than 10, appeared at the entrance. He was panting, sweat dripping from his brow. Naima and Bashiri turned to him. "Are you Naima?" he asked, eyes wide. "I am," she said, stepping forward. "Your mother sent me," he said quickly. "She said, something bad has happened. She needs you. She said it's urgent." Naima's heart fluttered, but not with fear. Her mother's name no longer held power over her, but curiosity sparked. She glanced at Bashiri, who gave a slight nod. "She is still your mother," he said quietly. Naima packed a small cloth of food and left with the boy, walking through familiar paths that once felt like cages. When they arrived at her mother's compound, the place was eerily quiet. The once boastful home looked worn. The door creaked open, and Jumana lay on a mat, coughing weakly. Naima stepped inside. "You sent for me?" Jumana opened her eyes. "You came." "I did." Her mother's voice was dry and low. "The house? The grains? They're gone. Dula took everything. He left for the city. He said, I was a burden." Naima stood still. The pain in her mother's eyes mirrored the same pain she had once felt. "So now you need the daughter you sold." "For a sack of millet," Naima said gently, not with anger, but truth. Jumana's eyes welled. "You have every right to hate me." Naima knelt beside her. "I don't hate you. I've simply stopped needing your approval." Tears rolled down her mother's cheeks. "I was wrong," Jumana whispered. "I thought strength meant never showing love. But you found it, didn't you? With him." Naima said nothing. Her silence was the answer. She gave her mother water and left some food. As she rose to leave, Jumana gripped her hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Naima looked into her mother's eyes one last time. "I forgive you," she said, "but now I must return to the life I chose." The walk back to her hut felt lighter. The sky seemed wider. When she arrived, Bashiri was waiting outside, his hands stained with dye, a bowl of warm food beside him. Naima smiled. "She's still the same, but weaker." Bashiri nodded. "And you?" "Stronger," she said. Simply. That evening, the village elder visited. Word had spread of Bashiri's trade and Naima's strength. The elder invited them to share their journey at the harvest festival, a tale of honor rising from shame, of love blooming where rejection was planted. As Naima stood beside Bashiri that night, watching the stars blink across the dark sky, she finally understood. She was never cursed. She was never unwanted. She was just waiting for the place where she truly belonged. And now she had found it.